The billionaire yelled in Arabic, and only the black maid replied, silencing everybody in the room. "Welcome to Tales by Orion. Let's uncover what really happened." The polished marble floors of Khadim al-Jamil's penthouse were a universe of silent, cold reflection. In their mirror-like surface, the city of Chicago stretched out and fell away, a map of distant glittering lights. For Alara, these floors were a geography of labor, a territory to be conquered each day, with a soft cloth and a silent prayer for invisibility. She was a ghost in this palace of glass and steel, a quiet presence, whose only purpose was to erase any trace that life, with its messy human fingerprints, had ever occurred. Her movements were a practiced choreography of efficiency, a dance of self-effacement learned over 2 years of service to a man she had only ever seen in passing, a blur of expensive tailoring and a palpable aura of immense, restless power. The other staff spoke of him in hushed, reverent tones, a modern pharaoh ruling a global empire from this sterile, skybound throne. They traded stories of his ruthlessness in business and his legendary impatience. For Alara, he was simply the gravitational center of this silent world, the unseen force that dictated the rhythm of her days. She knew the scent of his cologne, the precise weight of his footsteps on the Persian rug in the library, and the way the late afternoon sun hit his empty leather chair. These were the intimate details of a life she was paid to observe but never intersect. Her own life, the one with dog-eared linguistics textbooks from a forgotten university career and whispered bedtime stories for her younger sister, was tucked away, a secret kept safe from the sterile air of the penthouse. Here she was only her function, the cleaner. Today was different. The air, usually still and climate-controlled, was thick with a tension that felt electric. Mr. Al-Jamil was in the grand study, a room Alara typically cleaned in the pre-dawn hours. But an urgent meeting had been called, and she had been instructed to remain on hand, just out of sight, in the adjoining corridor. The study doors were heavy oak, but they were slightly ajar, and the sounds from within bled out into the hallway. She could hear Mr. Al-Jamil's voice, a low baritone that vibrated with controlled frustration. Another voice, belonging to his senior vice president, a man named Marcus Thompson, was placating and reedy. Then there were the distorted, tinny voices from a large monitor, speaking accented English. It was a deal, a massive one, involving a tech merger with a firm in Riyadh. Alara polished a silver picture frame, her reflection a fleeting somber shape. She understood the cadence of high-stakes negotiation, the false pleasantries masking unyielding demands. It was a language of its own, and she had become fluent in its silences. Suddenly, the fragile piece of the negotiation shattered. A technical glitch, a dropped connection, a crucial slide deck failing to load. The voices on the monitor became a garble of agitated Arabic. Thompson's voice rose in panic. "We're losing them, sir. The connection is unstable. They think we're being deliberately evasive about the IP transfer clause." A moment of terrifying silence followed, a vacuum of immense pressure. And then Khadim al-Jamil's voice erupted, not in English, but in a torrent of raw, furious Arabic. It wasn't the classical, formal Arabic of news broadcasts. It was a specific, fiery dialect from the Najd region, laced with frustration and contempt. He wasn't yelling at the partners on the screen. He was unleashing his fury directly at Thompson. "Do you hear them? You fool! You've insulted them. Your translators have butchered the meaning. They believe we are calling their chief engineer a thief." The words were a whip crack in the silent penthouse. Thompson, who spoke not a word of the language, could only stammer, "Sir, I don't understand." The men on the screen were now silent, having heard the outburst. The deal, worth billions, was not just failing, it was imploding in a fireball of cultural misunderstanding. In the corridor, Alara froze, the polishing cloth still in her hand. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to shrink further into the shadows, to become smaller, to disappear. But the words he had spoken, the precise, elegant, and now furious dialect, were words she knew as well as her own name. They were the words of her grandmother's stories, the language of her own forgotten history. The silence from the study was absolute, a black hole of failure, and in that moment, a force she didn't recognize as her own pushed her forward. She took a single deliberate step out of the shadows of the corridor and into the threshold of the magnificent study. The scene before her was a frozen tableau of disaster. Khadim al-Jamil stood with his back to the door, his powerful frame rigid with incandescent rage, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Marcus Thompson was pale, his face a mask of sweat and confusion, staring uselessly at the massive screen where the three Saudi partners sat, their expressions grim and unreadable. The air was so thick with tension, it felt hard to breathe. For a second, no one noticed her. She was just a part of the background, the silent maid, as much a fixture as the ficus tree in the corner. But the space she now occupied was charged, a boundary crossed. She cleared her throat, a sound so small it was almost swallowed by the cavernous room. "Sir," she began, her voice quiet but clear, betraying none of the tremor she felt inside. Thompson turned, his eyes widening first in confusion, then in outright fury. "What are you doing? Get out," he hissed, his panic finding a new, easier target. But Kadim al-Jamil didn't turn. He remained perfectly still, as if her single word had sent a jolt through him. The rage did not dissipate, but it was now contained, held in a state of suspended animation. Ilara ignored Thompson. She took another step into the room, her gaze fixed on the back of the billionaire's head. She spoke again, and this time she did not speak in English. "Forgive me, sir," she said, her Arabic as fluid and natural as his own, the dialect a perfect echo. "It is not the translation of the word thief that has offended them. It is the use of the term sarik in the subclause. In this context it implies not just theft, but a deep, personal betrayal of trust, and dishonor to their family's name." The silence that followed was different. It was no longer the silence of failure, but of profound, earth-shattering shock. Kadim al-Jamil turned around slowly, his movements measured, as if he were afraid the scene would dissolve if he moved too quickly. His eyes, the color of dark, rich coffee, were not angry anymore. They were wide with an astonishment so pure it seemed to momentarily erase the immense power he wielded. He scanned her from head to toe, from her simple, practical shoes to the neat way her hair was tied back, as if trying to reconcile the woman he saw with the voice he had just heard. The maid, the cleaner he had passed in the halls 100 times without a second glance, the one who polished his silver and emptied his trash, was now standing in the heart of his empire, deconstructing a multi-billion-dollar negotiation in his own native tongue. Marcus Thompson looked back and forth between them, his face a comical picture of disbelief and indignation. "What is going on? Someone remove her," he sputtered, taking a step toward Ilara. But Mr. al-Jamil raised a hand, a small, almost lazy gesture that stopped Thompson in his tracks as effectively as a brick wall. The billionaire's gaze never left Ilara. He tilted his head, a gesture of intense curiosity. "You," he said, the word a soft command. He switched back to Arabic, his voice low and testing. "Explain." It was not a request. It was a challenge, a demand for proof. The three men on the screen watched, their stony expressions now tinged with intrigue. They had no idea who this young woman was, but she had just spoken their truth into a room that was deaf to it. Ilara's heart was a frantic drum, but her voice, when she spoke, was a calm island in the storm. She looked past the two powerful men in the room and directly at the screen. She took a deep breath, the sterile, air-conditioned atmosphere feeling suddenly charged with possibility. "Gentlemen," she began, addressing the men on the monitor in their shared language. "Mr. al-Jamil's frustration was not with you, but with a flaw in the English documentation." Her gaze shifted to a specific section of the document displayed on a secondary monitor, her finger rising to point, a gesture so natural and authoritative, it seemed to belong to a different person. "Here, in Section 7b, the legal translation of intellectual property safeguards has been rendered with a phrase that, while technically correct, carries a deeply insulting connotation in your regional dialect. It implies a presumption of bad faith, a preemptive accusation." As she spoke, her initial hesitation melted away, replaced by a quiet confidence that flowed from the depth of her knowledge. It was the confidence of the academic she had once been, the linguist who saw language not as a set of words, but as a living, breathing ecosystem of culture, history and honor. She was no longer Ilara the cleaner. She was a bridge between two worlds that had been about to collide. She broke down the offending clause, suggesting an alternative phrasing, one that was not only linguistically elegant, but also culturally resonant. It was a subtle change, replacing a word of suspicion with one of mutual assurance, yet it shifted the entire foundation of the agreement from one of mistrust to one of partnership. Marcus Thompson stood by, his mouth slightly agape, looking like a man watching a magic trick he could not comprehend. He had relied on a team of expensive corporate translators who had missed the very soul of the language, a nuance that this quiet, invisible woman had grasped in an instant. Kadim al-Jamil watched her, his expression a mask of controlled neutrality. but his eyes were alight with a searing intensity. He saw the way she commanded the attention of the partners in Riyadh, the respect that was dawning on their faces as she spoke. They began to nod, first tentatively, then with conviction. The lead partner, a stately man with a gray beard, leaned forward, speaking for the first time since the outburst. "She is correct," he said in Arabic, his voice resonating with relief. "That is precisely the heart of our concern, the honor of our engineers. This is what we were trying to articulate." He looked at Alara through the screen, a deep respect in his eyes. "Young woman, you have a poet's understanding." The tension in the room evaporated, replaced by a palpable sense of forward momentum. Guided by Alara, who now stood beside the main console, pointing out lines of text as if she had been part of the negotiation team from the very beginning. They revisited the contentious clauses. She acted as a live, intuitive interpreter, not just translating words but mediating intent, smoothing over cultural friction with a grace that was breathtaking to witness. She explained the American legal team's perspective to the Saudis, and then articulated the Saudis' concerns about legacy and reputation to Mr. Al-Jamil, all in a seamless, respectful flow. The deal was not just saved, it was being reforged, made stronger and more resilient by this unexpected intervention. An hour passed like a dream. Alara, Thompson, and Al-Jamil worked with the partners on the other side of the world, line by line, until a new consensus was reached. Finally, the Saudi partner smiled, a broad, genuine smile that transformed his stern face. "Mr. Al-Jamil," he said in English, a clear sign of restored goodwill, "you have an extraordinary team. We are in agreement. Let us sign." The call ended. The screen went black, plunging the room into a heavy, profound silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the building's ventilation system. Marcus Thompson let out a long, shuddering breath, a man pulled from the wreckage of a near-fatal crash. He looked at Alara, his expression a complex cocktail of humiliation, resentment, and grudging awe. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. He simply shook his head, and with a mumbled "excuse me, sir," practically fled the room, unable to occupy the same space as the maid who had just done his job, the job of his entire department, with more skill than he could have ever mustered. Now, only two people remained in the vast study, the billionaire and the cleaner. The immense gulf of status, wealth, and power that separated them felt both infinite and, for the first time, utterly irrelevant. Alara stood by the console, her hands clasped behind her back, the adrenaline ebbing away, leaving her feeling strangely calm and exposed. She was once again acutely aware of her simple uniform, of her place in this house. She waited for him to dismiss her, to tell her to go back to her duties, to return to being a ghost. But Kadim Al-Jamil did not dismiss her. He walked slowly from behind his monolithic desk, closing the distance between them. He stopped a few feet from her, not looking at her with the detached gaze of an employer, but with the focused, searching look of a man trying to solve the most fascinating puzzle he had ever encountered. The silence stretched, filled with unspoken questions. "For 2 years," he said finally, his voice a low rumble, devoid of any anger. "For 2 years, you have been in my home." He gestured vaguely at the room, at the life she had so meticulously maintained. "And you said nothing." It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of profound wonder. Alara met his gaze, her own clear and steady. "It was not my place to speak, sir," she said simply, the ingrained habit of her role asserting itself. He gave a short, sharp laugh, a sound of pure disbelief. "Not your place?" He took another step closer, his curiosity overriding all pretense. "You just saved a $3 billion deal. You navigated a cultural minefield that my best-paid executives blundered into. You spoke a truth that no one else in this room was capable of hearing. I think you have earned the right to decide what your place is." He fell silent for a moment, studying her face. "I will not ask you how you know my language. It is clear you know it better than some of my own family." He paused, his next question softer, more personal. "I will ask you why. Why are you polishing my silver instead of running a boardroom?" For the first time, a flicker of the old pain, the life she kept hidden, crossed Alara's face. She looked away, towards the vast window and the city beyond. The story was hers, a heavy thing she had carried alone for so long. But in his question, she did not hear condescension or pity. She heard genuine human curiosity. So she told him. She spoke of her scholarship to Northwestern, of her passion for comparative linguistics and semiotics. She spoke of the sudden illness that had taken her mother, leaving her as the sole guardian and provider for her 2 younger siblings. The academic world, with its long timelines and meager stipends, was a luxury she could no longer afford. The loans, the medical bills, the daily cost of living, it had all crashed down at once. She took the first well-paying, stable job she could find, a job that required no resume, only a willingness to work hard and remain invisible. I needed to make sure my sister could finish high school, she finished, her voice quiet but firm, and my brother could stay in his school. Their future had to come first. My own could wait. He listened without interruption, his intense gaze never wavering. When she finished, the room was once again steeped in a contemplative silence. He had built an empire by judging assets, by calculating risk and reward, by seeing the hidden value in a company or a patent before anyone else. And for 2 years, the most valuable, most underestimated asset in his world had been quietly cleaning his floors. He saw it all in a flash of damning clarity, his own blindness, the casual arrogance of his world that sorted people into boxes, labeling them and dismissing their true contents. He had looked at Alara and seen a uniform. He had never once thought to look at the woman wearing it. He finally nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture of understanding. A person's worth, he said, more to himself than to her, is not their position, it is their character and their courage. He walked back to his desk, but he did not sit. He picked up a sleek black phone and dialed. "Amira," he said into the phone, "cancel my 4 o'clock and get me the file on the Al Jamil Educational Foundation. The cross-cultural initiative. Yes, that one. I have found our new director." He hung up and looked back at Alara, whose eyes had widened in shock. "This is not a reward for saving a deal, Alara," he said, using her name for the very first time. "A bonus is a reward. This is a correction, an alignment. Your talents are wasted here. My foundation's mission is to build bridges between cultures, to foster the very understanding you demonstrated today. It needs you. Your mind, your history, your voice." He paused. "Your old life did not end. It was waiting for you to be ready to reclaim it." The days that followed were a blur of transformation. Alara walked through the penthouse no longer as a ghost, but as a person. The other staff who had once barely acknowledged her, now watched her with a mixture of awe and reverence, their quiet nods and small smiles, a testament to the seismic shift that had occurred. Marcus Thompson avoided her entirely, his presence a shrinking shadow of its former arrogance. A week later, Alara stood not in the study, but in a bright, airy office on the 34th floor of the Al Jamil Foundation building. The scent of lemon polish was replaced by the smell of old books and fresh coffee. Instead of a cleaner's tunic, she wore a simple but professional blazer, a gift left for her with a simple note, "A new beginning. K.A." Her new desk was made of warm, light-colored wood, not cold marble, and on it was not a polishing cloth, but a stack of files detailing educational programs in Cairo, cultural exchange initiatives in Dubai, and literacy projects in rural Morocco. It was the landscape of her abandoned dreams, suddenly and vividly restored. Qadim Al-Jamil became a mentor, a guide. He met with her twice a week, not to oversee her, but to listen. He was fascinated by her perspective, her intuitive grasp of the human element, that so often got lost in the cold calculus of business and philanthropy. He saw in her a wisdom that his immense wealth could not buy, the wisdom of resilience, of quiet dignity, of a life lived with integrity in the face of hardship. She wasn't just an employee, she was a reminder of a truth he had almost forgotten. He found himself challenging his own assumptions, looking at his own foundation's work through her eyes, and seeing the flaws, the places where they were imposing solutions instead of listening to needs. She was changing his world as much as he had changed hers. 6 months later, the scene is a conference room in Abu Dhabi. A tense negotiation is underway between a skeptical American tech incubator and a local Emirati council of elders. They are at an impasse over the educational curriculum for a new coding academy. The Americans see it as a simple matter of technical training. The elders see it as an investment in their children's character, inseparable from their cultural heritage. The air is thick with polite but firm disagreement. At the head of the table stands Alara. She is poised, her voice calm and assured. She moves between English and Arabic with the effortless grace she displayed in Mr. Al-Jamil's study. But now it is honed, practiced, and imbued with the authority of her position. She is not just translating, she is reframing. She speaks to the Americans about the Arabic concept of ilm, knowledge that encompasses not just data, but wisdom, ethics, and moral responsibility. She speaks to the elders about the Western tradition of innovation, framing it not as a rejection of tradition, but as a new tool to empower and preserve it. She finds the common ground, the shared human values buried beneath the corporate jargon and cultural suspicion. She creates a bridge of understanding, and slowly, carefully, invites both sides to walk across it. Watching from the back of the room, unseen by the main group, is Qadim al-Jamil. He is not there as a supervisor, but as a witness. He sees the respect on the faces of the elders, the dawning comprehension in the eyes of the American executives. He sees Alara, a woman his world had labeled as invisible, now standing as a beacon of connection. Her unique past, not a liability to be hidden, but a superpower to be wielded. A quiet, profound sense of pride fills him. He had not just offered her a job, he had unlocked a force for good that he never would have found, if not for a moment of his own worst anger, and her moment of greatest courage. It is a humbling, and deeply gratifying, realization. True value is not always loud. It does not always announce itself. Sometimes, it is quiet. Sometimes, it is hidden behind a uniform, waiting patiently in the shadows. We live in a world that is quick to label, to sort, to judge a book by its cover, a person by their position. We decide who is important and who is invisible, who is worthy of our attention and who can be overlooked. But how many of us have a hidden language, a secret knowledge, a quiet strength that the world has not yet seen? The most profound transformations do not begin with a grand plan, but with a single, authentic moment, a choice to speak up when you are expected to be silent, to show a part of yourself you have been taught to hide. Alara's story is not just about a change of fortune. It is a testament to the quiet power that resides in every person who has ever been underestimated. It is a reminder to look closer, to listen deeper, and to never ever assume you know the true measure of the person standing right in front of you. Because sometimes, the voice that can change the world is the one you least expect to hear.